The sharp crack of gunfire split the heavy silence, echoing through the elite shooters club, a luxurious sanctuary reserved for the ultra-wealthy. Amid custom-tailored athletic gear and million-dollar rifles gleaming under LED lights, a woman quietly stepped through the grand glass doors. Claire Bennett, Teddy uniform, Surinamon. Worn jacket, faded jeans, a frayed canvas cross-body bag slung over one shoulder. And in her hands, an aging warrior, a Remington M24, a rifle that once wrote legends on the battlefield, but now looked like a relic long forgotten. She didn't belong here. And every eye in the room made that painfully clear. Scoffs rang out. Snide remarks cut through the air like invisible bullets. Look at that, they're letting the janitors shoot now. Grant Whitmore, 7-time national shooting champion, sneered. Claire said nothing. She simply pulled out a card, a worn VIP pass, issued by someone everyone here would bow to. If they only knew. No one realized that behind those quiet eyes, a fire smoldered, the fire of someone who once learned to shoot from one of the Navy's greatest legends. And today, that fire would ignite. One bullet, one shot, one moment to flip the story upside down. You think you've seen intense showdowns? You think you've witnessed miraculous comebacks? You haven't seen anything yet. The elite shooters club where every bullet fired was weighed in pride, fortune, and reputation. Only those with pedigrees, sparkling achievements, or bottomless pockets were allowed past its gates. Claire Bennett had none of these things. She stood quietly at the reception desk, her auburn hair tied neatly back, her weathered khaki jacket sagging slightly at the shoulders, her worn flats dusted from the street. She handed over her VIP card, old but valid. The young receptionist, her name tag reading Ashley, wrinkled her nose and gave Claire a disdainful once-over. "I'm sorry," Ashley said, her voice flat, laced with mockery. "The VIP zone is for members or invited guests only." Claire remained calm. "I have an invitation," she replied, voice soft but unwavering. A sharp beep sounded as the scanner lit up green. A flash of confusion crossed Ashley's face before she forced a stiff smile and begrudgingly waved Claire through. Inside, the opulence hit even harder. Carpet so thick it swallowed footsteps. Crystal chandeliers showering shimmering light onto custom firearms worth more than some homes. CEOs, senators, Olympic athletes all lounged at pristine shooting bays, sipping fine wine, casually twirling rifles that cost tens of thousands. And standing above them all, a figure like a crowned king, Grant Whitmore. 42 years old, 7-time national champion, 2 Olympic gold medals. Clad in a custom-fitted shooting suit that hugged his athletic frame, his smug gaze swept the room. Another perfect shot. Another burst of applause as his bullet punched clean through the bullseye. Grant offered a faux humble shrug just in time to catch sight of Claire walking by. He smirked. "Well, would you look at that?" he said loudly, his voice bouncing off the marble walls. "Club's letting in the cleaning crew now." Laughter erupted. Some chuckled openly. Others simply sneered, shooting her pitying glances. Claire heard it all. She was no stranger to these looks. As she approached the far end of the range, the mockery still buzzed in the air, half ridicule, half anticipation of the disaster they expected to unfold. She selected a booth tucked into a corner. She placed her bag down carefully and pulled out her weapon. A battered Remington M24, the kind most here had only seen in military museums. A snicker broke the silence. "Wonder if that relic even still fires," someone muttered. Grant, champagne flute in hand, sauntered over, that wicked gleam flashing in his eyes. "Sorry, sweetheart," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "This is a shooting competition, not an antique show." Claire lifted her gaze to him, her brown eyes glinting with a cold, almost detached calm. "I'm just here to practice," she said, her voice composed. Grant narrowed his eyes. Then a new idea sparked. "Tell you what," he proposed, voice slicing through the charged air. "You and me, one match, your sure. If you hit dead center at 100 meters, I'll buy you a drink. But if you miss, he smirked cruelly, you pack up and get out. A ripple of whispers spread like wildfire. Claire considered what can now one, Ewan Tinakuman. Part of her wanted to walk away. But another part, the quiet, resilient part, the part steeped in lessons from the man who had taught her to steady her breathing, to hold the line, refused to back down. I accept, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut deeper than any taunt in the room. The entire range froze. Grant threw back his head in laughter. Sure, he had just baited her into humiliation. He turned to prepare his beloved rifle, gleaming and custom-made, while Claire quietly checked her weathered Remington. She didn't need the flash. She didn't need a parade. All she needed was this rifle and her memories. Memories of old lessons, of steady breaths, of calm, deliberate pressure on the trigger. Once again, she whispered the old words to herself. Shooting isn't about beating someone else, Claire. It's about mastering yourself. Grant Whitmore stood at his firing lane, adjusting his stance with an effortless swagger. Every movement polished, deliberate, was part of a performance choreographed for the eager crowd gathered around him, all hungry for a public spectacle, a clean takedown. He hoisted his customized $50 $1,000 rifle, dialed in the latest tech-laden scope, and squinted downrange. A sharp boom echoed. The digital scoreboard instantly flashed the result. Bullseye. A wave of applause rolled through the room, crashing against the cold, isolated corner where Claire stood. Grant turned, raising an eyebrow at her, that signature half-smirk playing at his lips. No pressure, he sneered. Just try not to scuff the new marble floors with that museum piece. The crowd roared with laughter. Claire stepped toward her lane, her battered boots whispering across the polished floor. Every eye tracked her, vines of disdain and curiosity tangling around her like thorny ropes. She rested the worn Remington M24 onto the shooting stand. No laser optics, no high-tech gadgetry, just a battered iron sight, a mechanical rangefinder, and a belief in something unshakable. Behind her, the murmurs grew. Does she even know how to shoot? Bet the rifle falls apart before she pulls the trigger. Someone grab popcorn, this'll be a show. Claire lowered herself smoothly, pressing her cheek against the rifle's stock, inhaling slowly. Memories flooded back, misty mornings on empty fields. An old man in a weathered army jacket teaching her every breath, every squeeze of the trigger. Don't fight the rifle. Claire, let it become a part of you. A soft exhale. Then Nefsort Gerange. Crack. Turmunanan. The shot rang out, clean and sharp. The scoreboard flickered for a second. Bullseye. The room fell eerily silent, as if someone had vacuumed the very air from their lungs. Grant frowned. A few people rubbed their eyes, sure they'd misread the screen. Claire showed no reaction. She simply reloaded, calm as a still lake, readying her second shot. Grant cut in, his voice sharp. Hold it, Istanon. One lucky shot doesn't mean anything. Even amateurs get lucky once. He smirked, venom dripping from every syllable. Let's raise the stakes. Shall we 4 more shots? All have to hit dead center. Miss even once and you're out of here. For good. For good. The insult hit like a slap. The room hung on Claire's next move. No one expected her to accept, but Claire merely nodded. No fear, no hesitation. She knew exactly why she was here. Not to prove anything to them. Not for hollow glory, but to honor the man who taught her how to stand tall in life and behind a rifle. Claire drew a steady breath, shoulders relaxed. Uncrack second shot, crack third shot, crack fourth shot. Each shot thudded like a drum beat, hammering the sneers and snickers into a suffocating, heavy silence. The digital screen lit up. 4 flawless hits, each bullet punching neatly, cleanly into the bullseye, stacked so tight they seemed drawn by the same hand. Grant's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening around his champagne flute. Claire chambered her final round. She paused for half a heartbeat, A subtle breeze tickled across the range, and Claire adjusted her stance ever so slightly. Crack. The fifth shot shattered the tension like glass. When the target reeled back toward them, the truth was undeniable. 5 shots, 5 bullseyes, winning charmed, not a millimeter off. A few hesitant claps echoed from the back of the room, then more, growing louder, surging like a rising tide throughout the elite shooters club. Grant Whitmore stood frozen. His face flushed a furious shade of crimson, a cocktail of rage and humiliation boiling just beneath his skin. Claire turned, calmly packing away her rifle. She didn't need words. The results spoke louder than any speech. But then, Natty Urin Farmon, Grant's voice cut through the applause, sharp as a blade. We're not finished. His words dripped with defiance, daring her. If you're really as good as you think you are, he challenged, then face me, a real match. Head to head, all types of weapons, all distances. And this time, Shirmatter Mishurin. He bared his teeth in a feral grin. The loser leaves this club. Forever, Ludmeren. Claire lifted her gaze. Her eyes calm, unwavering, pierced straight into Grant's, hitting him harder than any bullet ever could. She nodded. Slowly, steadily, like a silent declaration of war. The Elite Shooters Club had never seen an afternoon like this. News of the upcoming showdown between Grant Whitmore, the undefeated 7-year champion, and a nameless woman armed with an old rifle spread like wildfire. Within an hour, from the luxurious lounge to every corner of the shooting ranges, the whispers grew louder. Some buzzed with excitement, eager to watch a humiliation unfold. But some for the first time secretly hoped the girl would topple the smug king. Grant stood in the grand hall, arms crossed at his waist, his gaze flickering toward Claire, who was quietly checking over her battered Remington M24. We'll compete across 10 shooting stations, Grant announced, his voice booming across the room. Each station a different weapon. Handguns, shotguns, long-range rifles. The crowd erupted, thrilled at the promise of a full-blown battle. Simple rules, Grant continued, a cold smirk tugging at his mouth. Whoever wins the most stations wins the match. Loser, never. He paused dramatically as permanently banned from the Elite Shooters Club. All eyes turned to Claire, silently daring her to flinch. But Claire simply lifted her chin, her gaze as unshakable as a stone in a storm. I accept, she said, her voice calm enough to hush the entire hall. Grant's smirk deepened. In his mind, this was no longer about skill. It was a public execution, and he was going to be the executioner. 2 hours later, the main competition arena was cleared out. The VIP seating was packed with the club's elite CEOs, military generals, high society journalists, all tipped off about this once-in-a-lifetime duel. Rebecca Stone, the club's manager, took center stage. Her face was tense, her eyes darting between Claire and Grant. To ensure fairness, Rebecca declared, all weapons will be provided by the club. No personal equipment allowed. Grant nodded, brimming with confidence. Claire said nothing. Her eyes swept over the arranged arsenal with quiet focus, noting every caliber, every adjustment, every distance. She had lived her entire life in situations where a single misstep could cost everything. Today would be no different. Station 1, Afurino 1, Shuriken 1. Glock 17 standard issue handgun. Grant stepped up first. He gripped the Glock like an extension of his own hand, unloading round after round at the 20-meter target. Relado Warsoner, Mercer result. 9 out of 10 shots in the inner ring. The crowd applauded raucously. Claire stepped up. Her hand was so light on the pistol, it was as if it was part of her body. She aimed steady, patient, and fired. 10 shots, 10 bullseyes. Score, Claire 1, Kurhinen, Grant 0. Grant's smile tightened. He hadn't expected her to hold her own with a handgun. Station 2, shotgun, clay pigeon shooting. Grant motioned to the referee, hoisting a Benelli M4 like it was a toy. Clay discs launched into the air. Grant fired in rapid bursts, hitting 8 out of 10. Not bad. Claire picked up the shotgun, quickly assessing its weight and recoil. As the first clays soared skyward, she didn't rush. She waited like an ancient hunter and then struck. 9 out of 10 shattered midair. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Score, 1-1, the Maywer. Claire 2, Grant 0. Grant pressed his lips into a thin line. Station 3. AR-15 semi-automatic rifle. Distance, 50 meters. Grant moved first. He shot swiftly, stylishly like a dancer, but the rush cost him accuracy. Claire, on the other hand, fired each round as if it were a heartbeat steady, synchronized, perfect. When the scoreboard lit up, Claire had edged him by 2 points. The applause this time was louder, sharper. Score, Claire 3, Gursafi der Oruwas, Gurnier Grant Siri. Grant's fist clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. This wasn't a competition anymore. This was a nightmare unfolding in real time. At the far edge of the stands, a small group of veterans watched quietly. No fancy suits, no fanfare. Among them stood Michael Reeves, an old comrade of Claire's late father, his eyes glistening with pride. She's not just shooting for herself, he thought. She's shooting for every soul that was ever doubted, ever stepped on. And tonight, that quiet resilience would roar like thunder. Station 4. Desert Eagle. 50 AE heavy caliber pistol. A ripple of murmurs spread through the hall as Grant Whitmore stepped up, hefting the weighty Desert Eagle in his hands. This was the weapon of raw power, a gun where a single miscalculation could send the bullet veering a full meter off target. Grant narrowed his eyes, squeezed the trigger. Boom! The bullet punched through the target but missed the highest scoring ring. Trying to regain his composure, Grant fired again quicker, sloppier. When he finished, his final tally. 7 out of 10 hitting center mass. Not terrible, but nowhere near good enough for a champion being pushed to the edge. Claire stepped forward. She took the heavy Desert Eagle, quickly gauging the weight that pulled at her wrist. The crowd held its breath. Without any theatrics, Claire raised the gun, bent her knees slightly, grounding herself. Bang, the first shot cracked through the air. A bullet hole dead center. Bang, second shot. Another perfect puncture, right over the first. Bang, bang, bang. The shots rang out like a drumbeat of inevitability. By the time the 10th shot echoed through the hall, the audience exploded in thunderous applause. Score, Claire 4, Grant 0. Grant wiped the sweat from his forehead. The smug grin he had worn all afternoon now completely wiped away. He turned to whisper something urgently to his tech assistant, his face tight with strain. Up front, Rebecca Stone squinted, instantly sensing it. Grant wasn't just losing shots. He was fracturing one piece of pride at a time, in full view of everyone. Station 5, rapid-fire MP5 submachine gun. This was a test of speed and precision. Grant managed to claw back some confidence here. He handled the MP5 with the flair of a seasoned showman, spraying bullets with smooth, sweeping motions. Final result, Sereninanos. 8 out of 10 targets down. The crowd clapped loudly, hungry for a turnaround. Claire stepped forward. MP5 wasn't her specialty, but she remembered her father's old lesson. When the weapon moves faster than your hands, slow yourself to the rhythm of your heartbeat. She exhaled slowly, then squeezed the trigger. The rounds flowed like a controlled river, steady, unbroken. When the final target dropped, the results flashed across the big screen. 9 out of 10. The cheers this time shook the walls. Score, Claire 5, Grant 0. Spotlight hit Grant square in the face, exposing the unraveling panic flickering behind his eyes. The air grew heavy, stretched taut like a drawn bowstring. Even those who had once laughed at Claire now kept their mouths firmly shut. They weren't just witnessing a shooting match anymore. They were watching an entire system of privilege crack open before their eyes. Station 6. Long-range sniping, Remington 700. Grant believed this would be his comeback. The Remington 700 had been finely tuned, the same sniper rifle he had used to clinch last year's championship. He lay prone, lining up through the scope. Bang! First shot, center hit. Bang, bang. He fired methodically 9 clean hits, only one drifting slightly off-center. Result. 9 out of 10, highly impressive. Grant smirked, lifting his head to meet Claire's gaze with a glare of challenge. Your turn, he muttered. Claire picked up the Remington 700. She adjusted the sling, feeling every slight movement of the rifle against her hands. All sound seemed to vanish. In that moment, she wasn't standing inside the glittering elite shooters club. She was lying in the barren mountains where her father had taught her, where sunsets bled into the rocks and the only sound was the whisper of the wind. Banning, she. First shot, dead center. Bang, bang, bang. Each shot precise, economical, almost breathing in time with her own heartbeat. When the final shot rang out, the hall erupted, the scoreboard flashing. 10 out of 10. Perfect. The entire crowd leapt to their feet, applause exploding like a cannon blast. Score, Claire 6, Grant 0. Off to one side, in a shadowed corner, Ethan Ross, the senator's son who had once sneered at Claire, watched her with a different look now. Admiration, and nothing, something closer to regret. Station 7, rapid-fire duel, Glock 34. The arena lights dimmed, leaving only 2 bright circles illuminating the shooting lanes. The entire hall held its breath. Station 7 demanded speed and precision, a skill Grant Whitmore had once proudly claimed as unbeatable throughout his career. Grant stepped up first, gripping the familiar Glock 34. His hand trembled ever so slightly, a detail he himself didn't notice. Bang, bang, bang. Shot after shot echoed through the chamber. Grant managed to take down 8 out of 10 moving targets, a decent showing, but far from the flawless dominance everyone had expected. When he finished, he cast a challenging glance at Claire. But hidden in that glare was something else, a flicker of desperation. Claire picked up the Glock. She checked the grip, syncing each breath with her heartbeat, a skill honed from long-ago training sessions under pouring rain with her father, learning how to separate her pulse from the howling wind. Bang, 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 bang. Each shot fired with unshakable certainty, as if the gun and her body were extensions of the same force. When the final bullet found its mark, the scoreboard lit up. 10 to 10 targets hit. The hall exploded into thunderous applause. Score, Claire 7, Grant 0. A seismic shift rippled through the crowd. The eyes once brimming with contempt now shone with astonishment and growing awe. The mocking laughter from earlier had vanished, replaced by whispers of admiration. But just as the tide turned, the first counterattack struck. Grant, once hailed as America's sharpshooting king, couldn't stomach the rapid collapse of his empire. After a moment's hesitation, he stormed toward the chief referee, whispering sharply. The referee frowned. Grant raised his hand and requested the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice rang out, wavering despite his attempts to stay composed. I have reason to believe that my opponent, Miss Claire Bennett, has received specialized training prior to this match. Their concern would constitute a violation of fair wine, open competition. The audience buzzed in hushed confusion. Claire remained still, her eyes cold and sharp. Rebecca Stone, the club manager, strode forward, her voice clear and commanding. At Elite Shooters Club, we judge excellence by skill, not background, not pedigree. Grant clenched his fists. Then run a full gun inspection, he barked. Make sure she's not using any illegal modifications. A heavy silence blanketed the shooting hall. It was obvious this was an act of desperation. Claire stepped forward, facing Grant squarely. She spoke just above a whisper, only for him to hear. You're afraid, aren't you? Grant's face flushed scarlet. Without breaking eye contact, Claire calmly placed the Glock onto the inspection table. Technicians from the club swept over the firearm meticulously, every inch, every component, all under the gaze of hundreds of spectators and live stream cameras. No, Thus the result, no signs of any illegal modifications. A swell of applause rose from the rows of retired veterans in the back, men who knew better than anyone. True skill couldn't be bought. It couldn't be faked. Grant gripped his own sidearm so tightly his knuckles turned white. He had already lost, and deep down, he knew it. But his foolish pride wouldn't let him admit it. Final act, Ichisun. Station 8, Barrett M82, the legendary sniper rifle. Distance, 300 meters. Pressure, unimaginable. The hall fell into a breathless silence, everyone bracing for the moment that would decide it all. Grant would fight, scrambling to salvage whatever shred of dignity remained. But Claire, she wasn't here just to win anymore. She was here to end the game, to shatter the old rules with one final, earth-shaking shot. Station 8, Barrett M82, 300 meters, the final trial. The air inside Elite Shooters Club grew thick, heavy as if a storm was about to erupt. The entire hall held its breath as technicians wheeled out the legendary Barrett M82, a sniper rifle notorious for its devastating power and pinpoint precision at extreme distances. Grant Whitmore stepped forward first, his face stone cold, though his trembling hands betrayed him. Gripping the massive Barrett, he inhaled deeply, trying to steady his nerves. He knew this was his final chance to salvage whatever remained of his crumbling reputation. The target, a single coin placed 300 meters away, visible only through a high-powered scope. A challenge so brutal that even seasoned marksmen approached it with caution. Grant lowered into shooting position. The entire hall fell into a deathly stillness. Bang, sir. The bullet tore through the air. On the giant screen, the result flashed. Edge hit 7 points. A ripple of murmurs swept across the audience. It wasn't a terrible shot, but nowhere near good enough for a man who once boasted invincibility. Grant stood up, pale and hollow-eyed. He knew if Claire hit the bullseye, it would all be over, not just this competition, but his entire Golden Boy legacy. Claire Bennett stepped forward. Under the cold, clinical lights and the weight of hundreds of eyes, she approached the enormous Barrett M82, a tiny figure facing down an entire system of privilege and entitlement. But in those amber eyes of hers, there was only absolute stillness, like the surface of a lake right before the storm. She slowly knelt, checking the rifle's settings one final time. Her right hand brushed the Barrett, a touch so gentle, it was almost an act of reverence, as if she were caressing a memory long buried. Then, with deliberate calm, Claire reached beneath her jacket and touched a small, worn silver necklace, a frayed piece of fabric stitched with a name. Ethan Bennett, the man who had taught her to fire her first bullet. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath. Claire inhaled deeply and lined up her shot. A breeze stirred the grass at the edges of the range, but inside her mind, there was nothing left but 2 fixed points. The muzzle, and the coin. No Grant, no crowd, no whispers, no judgment, only pure, crystalline focus. Backing in, the report of the Barrett M82 roared like thunder. 1 second, 2 seconds. The giant screen updated slowly. A tiny red dot appeared dead center on the coin. 10 points, a perfect bullseye. The entire hall erupted. Thunderous applause, roars of disbelief, cheers crashing like waves. Even those who had once mocked Claire shot to their feet, stunned and awestruck. Rebecca Stone, the club manager, grabbed the microphone, her voice trembling with emotion. Ladies and gentlemen, today, we have witnessed the first ever perfect shot at Elite Shooters Club since its founding. The scoreboard blazed to life. Champion, Chesinaruwanen. Claire Bennett, 80 points, perfect score. Runner-up, Grant Radcliffe, 74 points. Grant stood frozen away. When he staggered back a few steps, eyes vacant as if waking from a nightmare. No more arrogance. No more excuses. Only the brutal truth. He had lost and lost to the very person he had once ridiculed. Claire stood up, calmly removing her headset and gloves. She didn't pump her fists. She didn't shout in triumph. Instead, she looked around at the faces still frozen in disbelief, at the heads bowed in shame, and smiled. Not a wide grin, but a small, proud, and unshakable smile. The smile of someone who had conquered not just with skill, but with heart and unyielding spirit. Grant collapsed onto a chair, the sound of his stifled sobs breaking the silence. In a far corner, the group of elderly veterans men with hair like silver and spines made of iron all rose quietly to their feet and saluted Claire in a solemn military tribute. No words were needed. Their gesture weighed heavier than any trophy. Claire bowed deeply in return. Tears pricked her eyes, but she held them back. Because she knew this victory wasn't just for her, it was for every soul who had ever been sneered at, trampled underfoot by the arrogance of the powerful. The battle was over, but its echoes were only just beginning. Grant Radcliffe didn't just lose, he was crushed in front of the entire elite circle, under the glare of countless live-stream cameras exploding across social media. As Claire Bennett's name flashed in bold on the scoreboard, an avalanche of messages, videos, and comments flooded private groups, gun forums, and sports news outlets. And Variso and Claire, the legend, fall of Grant, but tourney yamawane for the warned. Real skill wins, if Turivi Namwasa Shamsontum. Within minutes, those hashtags were trending across Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Grant staggered off the firing line, his face as pale as a man who had just fallen off a cliff. The so-called friends who once clung to him for fame now slithered away, like hyenas abandoning a carcass. No one wanted to be associated with a fallen icon. Inside the VIP lounge, a sanctuary reserved for the most elite members, the leadership of Elite Shooters Club convened an emergency meeting. Rebecca Stone slapped a thick file onto the conference table, her face grim. "We have a major problem," she said sharply. "Grant tampered with competition equipment. We have all the evidence stored on the internal security system." A board member blanched. "Impossible, Grant is our poster boy. He's tied to sponsorships, advertising campaigns." Rebecca cut him off coldly. "And if we don't act fast, he's going to drag the entire Elite Shooters Club down with him." Outside, a mob of reporters swarmed the club's entrance, shouting over one another. "Claire, how does it feel to win this historic match? Do you have anything to say to those who once looked down on you?" Claire stood tall amidst the storm of flashing cameras and microphones. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gazed past the chaos to where a small group of veterans stood quietly at the edge of the range, waiting for her. Their eyes steady, silent gave her strength that no cheer could ever match. Finally, Claire took the mic, her voice clear and unwavering. "I didn't compete for revenge. I competed to remind everyone that true worth isn't born from wealth, it's forged through perseverance and self-respect." The entire crowd erupted into applause. Across the hall, Grant slumped into a chair, burying his face in trembling hands. He knew it was over. His career, his sponsorships, the pristine image he had crafted over 2 decades all shattered in a single afternoon. That very evening, his social media accounts came under relentless fire. Brands rushed to erase his image from their websites. Press releases were hastily rewritten or deleted. Tournament organizers issued statements suspending Grant's athlete credentials, pending ethical conduct investigations. In a leaked group chat, one sponsor coldly messaged, "Terminate all contracts with Radcliffe. No negotiations." Meanwhile, Claire was inundated with over 20 interview requests within 12 hours from CNN, NBC, Sports Illustrated, and more. But she declined most of them, because she knew this journey was never about fame. Her true mission had always been the same: to honor the promise she made to her father. At Elite Shooters Club, after a tense, closed-door meeting, the leadership issued an official announcement. Grant Radcliffe's membership was permanently revoked. All of his records and titles at the club were stripped. He was banned from competing in any club events for the next 5 years. The decision was posted publicly on the main hall's announcement board, the very place where Grant's giant promotional posters once loomed. Now, only a cold, empty space remained. That night, alone in his once lavish penthouse, Grant sat in silence, staring at an old championship trophy. A tiny crack had formed near the base, a perfect metaphor for his life unraveling. No calls came, no comfort offered. Only silence remained, the same silence he once weaponized against those he looked down on. And now, it served as the final verdict on his downfall. Claire, on the other hand, couldn't sleep either. She stood by the window of her modest apartment, gazing up at the starry sky. In her hands, she held a worn photograph, a picture of herself and her father during her very first shooting lesson. The edges were faded, but the spirit inside remained vibrant. She whispered softly, "Dad, we did it." And in that moment, Claire knew, no matter how chaotic the world became, she would always remain true to herself. 1 week after the historic competition ended, Elite Shooters Club hosted a special ceremony. No glitz, no glamour, just a new announcement board and a freshly built wall of honor. At its center, the most revered spot, was a photo of Claire Bennett, one hand holding a simple Glock, the other clutching a keepsake ring from her late father. Beneath the photo, an inscription read, "Claire Bennett, a reminder to us all. True worth doesn't need a sparkling coat. Only a steady heart and unwavering hands in the face of challenge." That day, Claire officially received an invitation from the club. Rebecca Stone, speaking on behalf of the board, handed Claire a special card and honorary lifetime membership, an honor only 3 people had ever been granted in the club's 20-year history. Rebecca's voice wavered with emotion as she said, "We're not giving you this because of your performance. We're giving it to you because of your spirit." Claire accepted the card, her hands trembling slightly. Not from pride, but because she knew if her father were still alive, he would have smiled and said, "My daughter did what no one dared to believe." Shortly after the ceremony, Claire received another offer, this time from the National Veterans Support Organization. "We're launching a shooting skills program for veterans and their families. Would you be willing to lead it?" She didn't hesitate. Claire nodded, because she understood this journey was never just about her. It was about all those who had been overlooked, mocked, and still chose to keep walking forward. In the days that followed, Claire began training her first group. A veteran who had lost a leg in Iraq, a young girl once rejected from a shooting range for her appearance, a single mother learning to shoot to protect her family. She taught them the same way her father had once taught her. Not just how to pull a trigger, but how to stay calm when the world turned chaotic. How to trust their own hands even when everyone else turned their backs. And in doing so, Claire realized, she wasn't just teaching, she was healing. Healing the old wounds of losing her father, of losing her childhood, of bearing her youth under the weight of silent endurance. Not through applause, not through grand victories, but through the light returning to eyes that once knew only despair. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, every nightly news broadcast echoed the same headlines. Sponsorships terminated one by one. Prestigious awards demanding returns. An official investigation opened into Grant Radcliffe's conduct and ethics violations. Grant tried to salvage his image, appearing on talk shows, claiming mental pressure and misunderstandings. But no one believed him, because everyone had seen it with their own eyes. How arrogance had crumbled to ashes before the steady heartbeat of true resilience. 3 months later, on a sun-drenched autumn afternoon, Claire stood quietly at a small suburban shooting range. A young boy, maybe 10 years old, his eyes shining bright, turned around holding his very first training rifle. "Miss Claire, I hit it," he beamed. Claire smiled, kneeling down to his level. "That's great, kiddo. But remember, true strength isn't in the rifle. It's right here." She tapped gently over his heart. The boy nodded fiercely, his eyes reflecting the same light Claire once carried at 14. when she first squeezed the trigger under her father's watchful eye. That night, long after everyone else had gone to bed, Claire opened an old wooden box, the only place where she kept memories of her father. She pulled out a worn letter, the paper yellowed with time. The words, though faded, were still clear. Wherever you go, whatever the world throws at you, remember, a true shooter is someone who stays calm, stays true, and fights for what's worth fighting for. Dad. Claire folded the letter carefully, pressing it against her chest. She knew then this journey had only just begun. A small flame inside her, but one that would never go out. If you've ever been judged by your appearance, if you've ever been dismissed for not fitting the standards, if you've ever stood silently before a crowd that mocked you, remember the story of Claire Bennett, a girl with a worn jacket, an old rifle, and a heart that never aged. She didn't answer with anger. She didn't argue back. She answered with 10 silent shots. And every single person who once laughed had no choice but to bow their heads. So next time someone doubts you, next time the world turns its back, don't answer with complaints. Answer with achievement. Because sometimes one action is enough to silence an entire world of prejudice. If stories like this set your heart on fire, don't forget. Hit like to fuel more victories. Subscribe to join the next journey. Turn on notifications, because the next story might just leave you breathless. See you at the next quiet but mighty victory.